Yeah, before you got up here, Darth, like I walked her down a very specific path. She acknowledged that there was such a thing as objective truth, and then I try to explain to her if there are different claims or different things that can be true, there must be something or something that is a unifying principle for all these states of affairs that, you know, that share the common principle of being true, the value of being true. And so I walked her down that path. She acknowledged all of that. And then when it came down to it, she just ended up at, well, I just don't believe. And I'm like, you can't say that there's
This
truth.
is the little game that they play.
Yeah.
They flip and flop like a fish out of water between outright denying God or identifying by the only word in the English language, atheist, which people know as the denial of God, to they pull out the neutrality card. Oh, I'm just unconvinced.
Right. So Saintly says, I sat with her. Okay, so Saintly, you were being good faith in the beginning. Towards the end there, you were being pretty bad faith. That got exposed pretty bad.
This is not unusual. And in fact, it's par for the course that we get these kind of state of prevarication and obfuscation when their cliches will no longer work in defending atheism. So when one asked very precise and clear philosophical questions about them grounding the not God world, all of a sudden they just become so confused.
Right. Darth, by the way, hold on a second. Hold on, 13th Disciple, real quick. Are you an adult?
Yeah, I'm 37.
Okay, and before you interact with Darth, I just want to say to Darth, I've been watching some of your old debates. I watched the one that you had with Shannon Q. Oh my goodness, the amount of posturing that woman did.
She was a train wreck. And by the way, in all due respect to her, we should refer to her respectfully under her proper title, Shannon Q. Duck Lips.
Yeah, oh my goodness. I couldn't, I'm like, oh my goodness, she's posturing. And then I read the comments of the video. I'm like,
they're
man.
Psychotic. They're psychotic in support of her.
Yeah. I was like, man.
Look, when you go to the video, I answered all of her questions in good faith.
Yeah.
I didn't resort to dodging or evasion or prevarication or being snide or rude or going into a laughing routine like I just snorted a whole lot of laughing gas.
Yeah.
But when it was my turn to question her, she started acting like a crazy woman.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she did. And what was funny, too, is all the people in the comments. I was looking at the comments, and the comments are like, oh, Darth is so mean to people, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, he was incredibly calm the entire time. Yeah.
At the end, I confronted her with her abominable behavior.
Right. Yeah. No, I thought it was funny. It's like, did you guys watch the same video? That was a very calm exchange until she started, I think she was just posturing basically for her fan base.
It was purely a performative response. It had no substance. It was devised to be as diversionary and obfuscatory as possible. Right.
And then also I looked at one of the ones you did with Dr. Graham Oppie as well. That one was pretty
tell your audience Graham Oppie is literally one of the smartest atheists in the world.
Yeah. He seemed pretty stumped by the questions that you were asking him.
Oh, I don't... Stumped is an understatement. He was blindsided.
Yeah. You could hear it. You can hear it in his...
He could not give a rational account of the coherence and intelligibility of naturalism as a whole in terms of what it is that's identifiable, that actualizes the unity within naturalism at any scale. I said to him, what is it that institutes and secures the unity and diversity in the world that you refer to naturalism? And his genius response, and by the way, don't mean any disrespect because I actually like Graham Oppie, and I think
he seems like a very well-mannered guy.
He's an extremely intelligent and well-educated man. Anybody who would sit under his professorship would get a very good education. However, his answer to me was, I see books on my shelf. That was not an answer to my question. I didn't ask him, why he believes there's unity. I asked him, what is it that actualizes the unity in the world, since you dismiss that it's God?
Right. Yeah.
You just can't take the unity for granted and go, oh, I see books on my shelf.
Right. Yeah, no, I just been, because I've been looking at some of your old debates, man, and honestly, man, I like that they're really good. I've been quite entertained by watching them. But enough of me fanboying. 13th Disciple, did you have something you want to say to Darth?
I'm about to fanboy real quick too. Darth, I've been listening to you for about 3 months now. I have two questions for you. First one is, do you have a YouTube or something? Is there?
No, I don't.
Okay, where can I watch these videos of your debates? Where do I get those?
Just go onto YouTube and type in Darth Dawkins.
Yeah, that's what I did. 13th Disciple. I immediately got one.
Just a warning, okay? Because the atheists have Darth Dawkins derangement syndrome, a number of them, very vile people, have been posting slanderous and libelous and defamatory material about my personal life, accusing me of domestic violence, STDs, you name it. None of this is true.
It's crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think for 1 second it would be. Second question is, I'm recently gotten into apologetics, but I've realized I want to go the philosophy logic route. What books can you recommend for me? Just jumping into this.
Well, do you have a pen?
I'm screen recording it now, so I could take it.
Okay, so there's a couple of books I can recommend. I would say keep on coming back and listening to my streams.
Right.
Also, you could read the book called Every Believer Confident.
Okay.
That's a really good introductory book. Another must-read book that is not at a beginner level, but it's called The Objective Proof for Christianity.
By the way, Darth, I have that book right here, right now on my bed, and it's
fantastic.
It is amazing.
It is fantastic.
Cool.
That's ironic. I'm just starting to read that one myself.
Excellent. The Objective Proof for Christianity.
Okay, great.
I even saw one of Dr. Greg Bonson's old YouTube debates. Man, that the old video that somebody posted.
When I listened to him debate the preeminent atheist defender Gordon Stein, I was blown out of the water. I had no idea who this guy is, and I said, "Who is this guy?" Okay, he just laid to waste a preeminent atheist.
Yeah, man, okay. Greg Bonson, man, what an amazing individual. Like it's like, man, yeah, I was like listening to it over a long drive and just, man, like,
all of his lectures are available now for free. Somebody with deep pockets bought the copyrights, and now you can get them for free.
That's what we need. We need to put this information out there. In fact, I think churches need to do two things across America. Number one, they need to start getting into spiritual warfare and teaching that. And then number two, they need to start better equipping, followers of Christ to defend
and by the way,
faith.
Apologetics is not just limited to unbelievers. The overlap of apologetics and theology and evangelization, there is a vast overlap. Okay, because doing apologetics is doing theology correct. It is just simply, properly recapitulating what God has revealed in Scripture about himself and about the nature of reality. And then when people oppose it, we apply 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5, where it says, "We are destroying all speculations and every lofty thing that is raised up against and above the knowledge of God, bringing all thoughts in captivity of Christ." So we destroy their model of reality, and we show them that the only rational model of reality is where Christ is Lord and the Creator. Right? Now they're not going to accept that and say, "Good, The moment you do not accept Jesus' self-identity claims and the propositional claims of God in and through the Bible, you are making an implicit, if not an explicit, worldview counterclaim that they're going to have to explain. But all too often, what they do is they just play the incredulity game, or, oh, no, that you didn't prove it. If you don't accept a proper representation of the Christian worldview, then you are speaking from and operating from an alternative model of reality, and you're going to have to explain it, because one's model of reality is going to ground the basis of truth, reason, and intelligibility and actuality. So what they do is they want to reject that the composite propositional content of the Bible is not God speaking authoritatively. But the moment that they reject that the propositional content that presents itself as revelation from God, when they reject that it is authoritative from God, by God, and self-authenticating, then they are implicitly declaring the authoritativeness of the human mind to reason without reference to God. And they're going to have to now explain that.
Right.
Okay?
Right. And this is one of the things I think I've heard you say a number of times that I think is so true. And I can also speak for myself, who was an atheist, who was lost at one point in time, and an atheist. It very much is a denial. And I think the reason it is because we want to do whatever the hell we want to do and not feel bad about it. And I can say that was definitely me. Romans, the way Romans depicts and talks about certain sinners, that was certainly me in a lot of ways. So, I think a lot of people definitely do.
You need to keep in mind that they are going to try to frame the dialectic or the interchange in a way that is favorable to them, and in a way by which they can insulate themselves from giving an account and defending their model of reality. So they're going to smuggle in the God denialism, or they're going to smuggle in the not God world without being upfront behind it, and then they're going to represent it in the verbal camouflage of, I'm unconvinced, or you didn't prove it. Okay?
Right.
If you don't accept the rationale for God, okay, then you're making a counterclaim whether you realize it or not. Because propositions can only be invoked as rational and actual, either from within the God world or within the not God world. Okay?
Right.
There's no neutral ground. There's no neutrality.
Right. Well, and the way this whole conversation started, right? Because first we were talking about the stuff on my background, and we got into it because Saintly down there, she was talking about getting married, and I said, I don't understand why an atheist gets married, because marriage is originally an institution of faith. And so she gave some answer about having power of attorney and next of kin for someone.
That's correct. Yeah, you can make decisions for your spouse, and there can be inheritance.
Well, so I told her though that there is something in the law called domestic partnership. So I was like, there's ways to still have that without calling it marriage, but yet you want to choose the one that's an institution of faith. So I find it funny. I'm like, why would it, and so that's what started the dialogue. I'm like, why would you need that?
Well, they're borrowing from the Christian worldview every time they speak. Okay? You have to choose your battles that you're going to have with them carefully, is because we all have a limited time to interact with these people. Like you'll notice with, what's her name, who I was just talking to. What was her name? See, I forgot already. Notice how she went into total confusion mode.
Yeah, you're talking about Saintly, that person.
Yeah, Saintly.
Yeah, so that's her down there. So Saintly, you were being good faith at first. I think towards the end there, it really did seem like you were pretending to be confused about stuff, and I think it was because you realized that there were things you couldn't answer.
It's a tactic of avoidance.
Yes.
And it's a tactic to insulate themselves from having to sincerely answer the question. You see, when we ask you about how is it that God does not exist? All of a sudden talking about the Christian God as a bait and switch. Now, we only defend the actuality of the Christian God, but what was under consideration is your view is that there is no God at all.
Right.
Okay? And when you sit there, you see, atheists only defend their atheism by cliches and slogans. How is it that God doesn't exist? And they go, because there's no evidence for God. Okay. How does the stipulation that there's no evidence for God, how does it follow from that God doesn't exist?
Right.
And you see, at that juncture, what they're going to do is they're going to shapeshift from God denialism to golly shucks, I'm unconvinced and I'm neutral. Therefore, you unilaterally have to defend God's existence. I'm just an innocent bystander, unconvinced. You see, this is a misrepresentation of their position. Their position will either be a direct or an indirect denial of God. And they try to masquerade their God denialism in the form of, oh, I just don't believe, right? So atheism goes from being answering the proposition that God exists and saying, no, he doesn't, to now atheism is, golly shucks, I'm neutral, I'm just unconvinced, that there's just an insufficiency of data, which is not their position. And you'll notice when she said, well, God doesn't exist because there's no evidence for God, I'll say, oh, okay, so God doesn't exist because the world is indeterminate? There's insufficient information? Or are you saying God doesn't exist because you have concluded that the world is independent from God? How did you determine that the world is in fact independent of God? And then she gave an appeal to ignorance fallacy was, oh, I haven't been shown otherwise. That's a classic appeal to ignorance fallacy.
Right.
But you see, even still, they're still denying God. Remember, there's no neutrality. If you do not accept and acknowledge that God exists, then regardless of how you label yourself or self-identify as atheist or agnostic, either way, you're denying God.
Right.
The classical atheist does it directly. The classical agnostic denies God indirectly while verbally pretending he's neutral.
Right, indirectly. Yep. Okay.
Right. And most of the time when I, get into it with atheists, I do try to give them a distinction, again, there's a difference, and that's why I say somebody kicked your dog, or there's a boot print on the side of your dog. Obviously, something caused that boot print to be there. Discovering that it's a someone, like it's a person that, kicked your dog or whatever, that, I try to tell them that, that's the epistemic question. And then knowing who it is, that'd be more about the ontology. So I always tell people, first we have to ask ourselves the question, what did it, or what, started it? What is the cause of this thing? And then once we know what that is, then we can talk about the who. You know what I mean? And
just remember, when they cannot articulate a clear and logical defense that God does not exist, they shapeshift into incredulity and representations that they're neutral, and that their atheism simply just constitutes an absence of a positive belief, as opposed to what their real position is they believe that God does not exist. So they will be upfront typically that they believe that God does not exist, but when they are held accountable for cashing that out and saying, tell me how you determine God does not exist, they shapeshift from holding the proposition of atheism that God does not exist to shapeshifting is, oh, I'm without a positive belief in God. And now they're claiming neutrality, which is not true. And by the way, to the person in the chat, okay, she was clearly dodging and diverting and obfuscating and rabbit trailing and playing, oh, I'm so confused game, because she didn't want to transparently answer the questions. Notice when I quoted her before I came on stage, she was emphatic about being a hardline classical atheist. But when I started questioning her, all of a sudden, she becomes a lacktheist. Oh, I just don't have a positive belief in God.
Right.
She changed her tune, which is what they always do. You see, I've had if you look up Darth Dawkins versus P.Z. Myers, he's a famous atheist with a PhD in biology. He's a foaming at the mouth atheist. When I asked him how God doesn't exist, he instantly shapeshifts to, I'm not saying there
So
couldn't
Darth, we
be
got
a
another
guiding
requester.
intelligence.
Oh wait, no,
Sure.
he left. Never mind. He
Okay.
left.
So some of these, even the professional atheists, will stand tall, identifying as an atheist, but when they're called on the carpet that's somebody who knows better, then all of a sudden they become agnostics. Okay?
Right.
Like when I spoke to Professor Stephen Law, how is it that God does not exist? He gave me an answer, and I said, that doesn't follow that God doesn't exist. I said, do you have anything else? Then he changed the parameters of the question to saying that a maximally benevolent God couldn't exist. Right? And I pointed out to him, I said, you're changing my question. I'm just asking you. I asked him earlier, I said, are you an atheist that no God exists? And he said, yes. I said, can you please explain to me why no God exists? And then when he realized I smoked out his diversionary response only to attack a maximally benevolent God rather than no God, he started to get creepy and sleazy and tried to impugn me. You can see it on YouTube. Just type in Darth Dawkins versus Stephen Law.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've been going over some of your old debates lately. And everyone, because Darth, I mean, I'll be honest. I've been like talking about how I've learned so much from you in the last couple of months, and doing that though, it's crazy. I mean, around certain people, even people that I would call friends, has sparked, I guess, them to get like agitated at just even hearing your name. So I'm like, it's kind of comical. Yeah.
Well, you should know that, along with COVID, there is a communicable disease that is spread on the internet. It's called Darth Dawkins derangement syndrome. And right now, there's not a cure for that.
Right. And when I asked a couple of my friends, and some of them are Christian, I asked them, I'm like, why would you say that? And they'll be like, oh, he's just so bad faith and blah, 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 blah. He doesn't let anybody respond.
Bad faith? No,
Yeah.
They just don't like the fact that
Yeah.
I don't pretend to be Mr. Rogers with these lying and prevaricating atheists, and that I'm confrontational and assertive when they start lying and cheating in the conversation.
Right.
Yeah, Tony, I've been listening to Darth almost a year, and it's very interesting how, and Darth will tell you this real fast, if you come up there and you're very professional and you answer Darth's questions, then he will stay very calm. He won't get loud. He won't raise his voice. I know what that is.
You know what
I mean?
I'm just saying that I was shocked to talk with jubilance, right? That I've been learning stuff because I've been praying. My prayers of late have been, in the last couple of months, have been for more knowledge and wisdom because I wanted to be able to defend my worldview. I wanted to defend the faith. I wanted to be closer to God. And I truly do believe that discovering Darth has been a godsend to my prayers because since I've become familiar with Darth, he has enriched me with a lot of very valuable knowledge, which is exactly what I've been praying for. I just need to take the time to go over it more. But being excited about that and communicating my excitement to my friends who are also believers, some of them seemed like they were very chafed by hearing his name. And so I was very shocked to discover that, even some Christian friends.
Well, why don't you invite them onto a stream and they can have a conversation with me and tell me, what I need to change.
Well, what I was trying to finish saying is that what I've noticed, though, is if they do not let their ego get triggered, because Darth is a heavy hitter. He comes at people full force. He doesn't sugarcoat things. He wants to get straight to the point, and he asks very specific questions that a lot of times flies over some of these people's heads. And even it takes me a few minutes to align with what he's exactly saying. But if they are very patient with him, then he will go over it with them, but they have to be respectful. They can't dodge his questions, and they have to answer his questions and be good faith. And that's the thing, is if they don't trigger Darth, because Darth will match their energy very fast, and if they will just have a good conversation. I've heard Darth talk with an atheist before for 45 minutes or longer, and it was a very cordial conversation they had. Now, does that happen very often? No, not at all.
No, because you
are very irrational. They're very irrational.
I say they employ the 3D strategy.
Yeah,
diversion, deflection, and then verbal disruption.
Yeah.
The final strategy is verbal disruption, and it's sometimes we call it death by mod.
Yeah,
okay? And it's so that they can get out of the conversation, blow the conversation up, and then go, "Well, Darth was a meanie; he kicked me."
Yeah,
I mean, isn't the whole idea of philosophy and logic to find the truth? It's not to be right; it's to find the truth. A lot of people don't want that.
Well, I think really what it comes down to is that they just don't want to be wrong. They won't let their ego say, "Okay, I'm listening. Please help me to see my errors in my thinking." They won't let their logic down enough.
Exactly.
They want
many of them are upset because the questions that I ask and the things that I say rips away the verbal masquerade that they're neutral.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It rips away their foundation. They don't have anything to stand on. He literally yanks the carpet out from underneath them.
Right.
You see, they'll go, "Well, God doesn't exist because there's no evidence for God." Say, "Can you explain your assertion there's no evidence for God?" And then they do this. They'll go, "Well, you're shifting the burden of proof. Atheism is just a rejection of a claim." Saying, "Look, you're telling me you're making a universal, unqualified negation that nothing constitutes evidence for God. I want to know how you determine that."
Yeah. I mean, really, you come with logic and a way of asking them very direct questions so strongly that it yanks the carpet out from underneath them so much that they end up going into a temper tantrum. They act like a little kid. They start to say, "It's no fair. It's no fair how you're acting."
No, it is fair. What's happening is we're getting down to what we call brass tacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now, for those of you who don't know, only for you older ones, the brass tacks is what they used to use to keep carpets in place. Okay. So we're getting down to the fundamental issues. Well, people don't want to get down to the fundamental issues because then they have some splaining to do. They just want to give these, community college lectures, right?
Yeah, they want you to sugarcoat it, Darth.
Yeah. So they when they realize their cliches don't work anymore, they start getting upset.
Yeah,
and that's why they start diverting and deflecting and obfuscating and rabbit trailing and then being verbally disruptive. Yeah. Or they pull what Saintly pulled, where it's just like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know the difference when somebody says, "I don't quite understand what you're saying here," versus somebody who is playing the "I don't understand" card as a get out of jail free card.
Yeah. Well, I've also noticed too, Darth, is that and I'm always constantly learning. That's why I love to listen to you guys talk. But sometimes, your verbiage and the way that you use your words and the way that you use your understanding of this knowledge, it flies over their heads so far that it leaves them dumbfounded. And yes, I agree with you. Some of them are willingly being obtuse and
they
ignorant
can
on
ask
purpose.
me for clarification. Look, I am not trying to speak in a way that is what we will call double speak. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm trying to use verbiage that brings precision to the conversation, but I'm not trying to nomenclature drop. If at any time somebody says, "I don't know what you mean by this or that," I have always been more than willing to stop and say, here's what I mean by this.
I've seen you do that a lot of times too.
But I'm saying, Darth, though, my observation after watching you for so long is that I feel like, and of course this is just observation, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that I've just noticed how you're like you've done it for so long, for so many years, that you're kind of like a drill sergeant, and you don't sometimes have enough patience with these people because they don't give you enough equal, respect and patience with how you're trying to ask them these questions.
Did you ever see Animal House?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Remember that? He goes, "Is that a pledge pin on your uniform?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, good times.
But that's what I'm saying is that I think if they would just slow the roll and just answer your questions and then ask clarifying questions if they need, then the conversation would go really far. And that's why you see that from time to time. But most of the time, they're so irrational that they won't do that. And so then they end up, you end up saying something that's very logical, though, but it triggers them because they're left with no response.
No, they have
and then they say something that triggers you, and then it goes to a shit show.
Well, they're doing that on purpose.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of times
it's called death by mod.
Yeah.
All right. So the bottom line is Romans 1 says they are without a defense.
Yeah.
Well, how are they without a defense? After they are the recipients of the revelation of God, Romans 1 says, ever since the beginning of the creation of the world, God's eternalness, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen through everything that has been made. So what I do is I try to philosophically represent that by saying everything in the world exemplifies and entails ultimate design and intentionality by God's mind and purpose. Okay? And if you do not accept that, then you're going to have to explain your worldview, which they can't, because Romans 1 says they are without offense. So whatever worldview that they invoke, it literally will be a figment of their imagination and one that they cannot rationally defend.
Yeah, but Darth, would it also
real quick, so Saintly, I see you in the comments. Saintly, you're always welcome to come back another time, and we can have more discussions. Like I said, as far as people that I've disagreed with, you were very polite. I'm just saying that, somebody can be bad faith and still be polite, and that just became evident when you were in your interaction with.
And another thing is, there's a different dynamic between different people. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And some people get very upset when they're asked questions that they realize they can't answer.
That's
so
right.
that they become resentful.
Yeah, but Darth, I had another question for you, though, following what you said before. Is I agree with you. The Scripture explains how they really have no excuse for the story of God and the Bible and Christ and all that. But what I was going to say is, wouldn't you say, though, to a degree, though, that the devil and the dark forces, though, kind of blind them from seeing the truth? And it's kind of like you can tell them about the Grand Canyon, but until they're there, standing there and have that aha moment, they don't really understand what you're saying.
Well, first of all, the Bible makes it very clear that God has made everybody to know that he exists. Unless, of course, let's say neurologically incapacitated, or possibly a registered Democrat. Yeah. So
possibly a
Democrat.
So everybody has a basic knowledge of God, even people that are aboriginals or unreached people. Everybody know that God exists. Yeah. There are people who choose to retain that, and there are people who choose not to retain that, and then to adopt a figment of their imagination rather than the world is entirely emblematic of a single causal first principle, namely a perfect God. Okay? Yeah. Then from that, people will either continue to accept God's revelation of himself in creation history and acknowledge the one true God who has given progressive revelation about himself through the prophets, ultimately in Jesus Christ. Some people acknowledge God, right, because they're not that crazy, right? But they construct a counterfeit representation of God, of a figment of their imagination, rather than what God has revealed about himself.
Darth, may I ask you a question, if you'll indulge me? Would you mind if because this has been awesome interaction having you here. Would you mind if I upload this live, or at least the portion of your interaction, to my YouTube, or and just put it up there for other people to have the benefit?
As long as I get a royalty of a 12-pack of Kit Kats once a month for 2 years.
I don't. Okay.
right,
I don't
listen, hey,
monetize
Darth,
my
listen.
YouTube channel.
I
My
know
YouTube channel is not
I'm
monetized, so I don't make
Kit Kats-
anything. Yeah.
Kit Kats are my favorite chocolate. So
Okay. Well, you know what?
that's
You tell me where to send it, and I'll send you a bunch of Kit Kats for sure.
Yeah, you can upload whatever you want. Be my
Okay.
All
guest.
right, Tony and Darth, I appreciate it, guys. I'll look into those books, and I'll keep on your lives.
Yeah. Well, Darth, I had one more really, really important question, because I want to see if you've ever experienced this, which I imagine you have. Is that, would you say, though, that sometimes when you're talking to these people, that sometimes when you come so strong and so heavy with God's ultimate truth, that what it really reveals is the demon within inside of them that starts spitting out their evil to you through the words of that human's voice, instead of really the person themselves?
I wouldn't say that Nancy Pelosi resides in those people.
Okay.
We got a newcomer, I think, loading in.
It's their sinful inclination, and they don't want to humble themselves before
Hello there,
God.
Star. Are you an adult?
Yeah.
Okay. How old are you? I'm sorry, you just sound a little young.
Oh, I'm 18.
What year were you born?
2006.
What year did you graduate high school?
2024. Yeah.
Wait, did you say what? Okay.
The year just started.
Yeah. Okay. Nope. Sorry, I just do not believe you.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
But so if I heard your answer correctly, Dar, you were saying that sometimes you don't think it's always the demon you could be talking to that was revealed through your questioning. It's more or less the person,
Clearly there is demonic influence throughout the world and all throughout history, and it manifests itself in different ways at different times.
Yeah.
But what is at root is the sinful inclination of the human heart. But because people are so routinely sinful, right, they become accustomed to it. Even as Christians, we become accustomed to it. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
And the more we expose ourselves to the revelation of God, the more we're going to have a realization of the extent of how we're not reflecting God's thinking.
Ain't that the truth?
And his character. So the unbeliever, when confronted with biblical truth, does not want to accept it, because in order to accept it, he must repent. I had one guy, I said, "You're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness." He goes, "Oh, yeah, that's what you Christians say. We just love our sin." And I said, "Yeah, you do love your sin, and I can prove it to you." And he goes, "Okay, prove it." And he goes, "Prove it to me." And I said, "The very foundation of sin is the notion that you are an autonomous thinker and an autonomous player on this planet. Because the only alternative is the autonomous God. Okay? So if you do not accept that God is, and he is the self-revealing God, then instantaneously you will be adopting that you are an autonomous thinker and player. Now, an autonomous player does not want to acknowledge that they are not an autonomous player. The recapitulation of God's existence is an indictment upon the false belief that one is an autonomous player. So people love their would-be or false notion of autonomy. And from their false belief of autonomy springs forth all sorts of sins. Okay? But the root sin that you love is your would-be false autonomy. And so when you're presented with the truth of God and the revelation of God, you're going to reject it, because in order to accept it, you have to acknowledge that your mental state of being autonomy is false, and therefore you have to repent of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I can tell you, just even from my experience being an atheist and being lost, I can tell you, yes, that definitely is less. Yes, you love your sin quite a lot. I would say that to be selfish and self-serving does come very natural to us in the sense that and that's like the thing that I realized when I came to Christ is that I have that sin nature in me. It was very easy to think of myself all the time. And coming to Christ, you're hit with the realization that, man, you're so filthy, like, and it's just like,
look at Isaiah. When God gave Isaiah a vision, Isaiah said, "I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell amongst the people in a land of unclean lips." He wasn't talking about swearing. It's just that he realized at times how ungodly his verbiage was. Okay, and when you don't compare yourself to God's revelation, then you can become accustomed to think that you're something other than what you are.
Right? Yeah. Well, Darth, along that line of thinking, I ask you a very simplistic question. Would you say that foul language is a form of, bad thinking?
In certain situations, it can be, but I wouldn't agree that in all situations.
Right. A lot of people like to bring up to me the one, power, life, and death in the tongue, and they talk about let no bad communication come out of your mouth, and this and that, and they say that because I tend to cuss, and maybe I do need to work on that some, but here's the way I look at it this way. It's like a sword, and ideally you should keep your sword sheathed, meaning don't speak, don't draw your sword, don't be harsh with your language with people for no reason. But if somebody, like, when I deal with certain people in debates, I get pretty ferocious with them. I definitely earn the tiger in my name. And I look at it this way. I look at it as drawing my sword. Yes, you've shown me that you're here to be hostile. That is the spirit that you are in. So I will draw my sword and come at you with the same, combative energy, or at least, be on guard. And so that's how I look at it. When it comes to like cussing or saying certain things, I prefer not to, but some people come at you specifically with that intention to be combative.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say, though, that like where it says in the Bible, like not to use God's name in vain, and of course that's not saying GD, because that's not technically God's name, but is it more or less the intent behind using verbiage to talk negatively against God? That's what it is, right?
There are times when I use certain choice words when upon reflection I shouldn't do it, even though I'm justified in my indignation.
Yeah.
But not all caustic terminology or phraseology is off limits. Because if you look at, like, for example, when Stephen spoke to the Jewish Supreme Court, he looked them right in the face after preaching the gospel to them, and he said, "You are uncircumcised in your hearts." That was so monumentally offensive and obscene to them, given their state of mind. It pales into comparison to somebody, let's say, using curse words. Okay? In fact, their reaction was so strident that they dragged them outside the city and they stoned them.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, I think
Jesus referred to the Pharisees as rotting corpses in whitewashed tombs. I don't think we realize how monumentally vile that was in their ears to be indicted that way. Okay? So this is not a license for somebody to drop an F-bomb or swear words. Okay? But at the same time, we got to be careful. When you look through Scripture, there are some really strong and caustic statements by the prophets and Jesus and the apostles themselves. Paul said to the high priest, he said, "You are a whitewashed tomb," right? Do you have any idea how caustic that was back then to talk that way? You see, we live in the first world. We have a kind of sanitized dealing with death. The coroner comes, or the funeral home comes. They put you in a body bag. They bring you away. They embalm you. You have an open or you don't have an open casket, and we have a sanitized version of death. Okay, but to say so when Paul said that to the high priest, somebody said, I think that was maybe the high priest or somebody else said, slap him for talking that way to the high priest. Paul immediately backtracked, not for what he said, but for what he said to the person's position, the high priest. You understand?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So it wasn't that he was being unchristlike in using such caustic terms that you're a whitewashed tomb. It's just that there was a principle in the Old Testament: you shall not speak evil of the leader, meaning the high priest.
Yeah, it was more. So what you were saying is it's more the way that he said it, not so much the way.
I think it's the spirit, and that's why I say, if the power of life and death is in the tongue, then the tongue is a sword. Yeah. And if the tongue is a sword, likened to a sword, then the spirit in which you wield that sword, I think the intentionality behind it, like the spirit in it, I think that's what determines, what is good or bad. Like in the same way, like if you draw your sword to defend yourself or to defend someone else, right? I can see that as justifiable, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I prefer not to get, super hostile with people, but people come at me with that energy quite a bit. And so I'm not going to sit there. That's one thing I would say I don't agree with, or I guess that's just not me, because I actually was a Marine. It's not in me to sit there like a little pansy and take that. Like, no, I'm a fighter. So if somebody comes at me with that energy, yeah, I'm going to draw my weapon and it's going to be game on,
I see what you're saying. You're justified in defending yourself. But I was going to say, would an analogy be to what we're talking about in the same principle of how Jesus said himself, if I'm not mistaken with this, which I'm pretty sure I got it right, is that he said, you have committed murder in your heart just by thinking it about someone, just like adultery, even before you even do the act,
Right.
Yeah, because it's about the intention in your heart more than it is the actual action, right?
Well, and the Bible does say that God judges in the spirit, and it says that God also judges in equity, and equity is fairness. So if somebody comes at you with that hostile intention, that hostile action, right? Like, I would say it's fair to treat them, to come at them the same, right? Like, that's the way I look at it. If God judges in equity, in fairness, because that's what equity is, well, then, yeah, I'm going to be fair to you, right, during this exchange. You come at me that way, I'm not going to sit there taking it lying down. Nope. Not going to happen. So, I don't know. That's just me. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm just like I said, I was a soldier, so I can't just sit there and just, that's just me. That's just me, though. I know there are other Christians who are in far better control of themselves, I guess, maybe as far as the way they use language or their temperament. I have found, though, that I think I have been more effectual. Because one of two things happens when I come at people that way. They're going to be so angry that I crapped on them that they will go learn and become better and more informed people just to come back and spite me. They're like, oh, I'm going to beat Tony, right? So they'll go and learn and become better people, more informed people, and then come at me just to spite me. Or they'll shut up and be like a dog, with their tail between their legs and never come back, in which I say it's win-win. Either you're going to come back a more informed, intelligent, better person, out of spite, which I'll take it. I'd prefer that you did it because you wanted to. But if you got to do it out of spite and anger for me, fine, sure. If that's what it takes for you to become a better person, I'll take it. And that's why we get into the scripture where, to endure hardship as a good soldier of Christ. That's how I see that scripture. I know that being harsh with people will probably mean that I will incur a lot of hate and hardship for it, and I have. But I think in doing it, it has made people who are very hardened of heart become more informed, and some of them I think have even changed their ways. So I think I've certainly in some respects gotten through to more people by not taking their BS.
Yeah. I kind of look at it like too is that it's all, I guess, how you control the ego, and like, do you use the ego as a tool or do you let the ego use you, and I love that analogy somebody come up with sometime that I heard called ego stands for edge God out, and I think that that's true sometimes in a way that when we let the ego,
it is. We didn't have an ego until we disobeyed God. You look at your dog or your cat, they don't know that they're naked. Animals don't have an ego. They're not embarrassed about being naked.
Yeah, and
right? When man sinned, when Adam and Eve sinned, then they were aware that they were naked. Then they were embarrassed. That is when they had ego.
Is that the reason why all the cartoon characters don't wear pants?
Yeah, probably.
But I gotta think is that ego is the sin actually itself, and
that's what I'm trying to say, Thaddeus. When you think about it, Adam and Eve were not embarrassed about being naked until they sinned. Once they sinned, they then became embarrassed. They had an ego.
Yeah. Well, but Tony, that brings up the next thought experiment that is very interesting to me, though, is that would that mean that sometimes the knowledge of good and evil, because that's what that tree was that they ate off of, is empowering the ego, and not always just a evil thing. It can be something what we call good, but it can be used in a bad way.
The ego is the self-serving aspect of the flesh. And that's a product of the flesh. The ego is the thing that's going to fear for your survival, for your mortal being. The spirit isn't afraid of death because the spirit has no ego. That's why I'm saying that the ego is an aspect of your fleshly being. And we got that, mankind got that when we sinned. So that's why our body can't enter into heaven. Our body is going to perish because it is the instrument in which we sin. And again, we already have original sin. We have sin nature in us, and I think the original sin nature, or the sin, that's ego. That's the egotistical aspect of humans. I truly think that's what it is. That's what I believe.
All right, guys, I gotta go. Thank you for having me up.
All right, Darth.
Thanks, Darth.
Pleasure having you, Darth.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having you. Yeah.